Welcome to Part 2 in our Vendor 1099 reporting series. In Part 1, we reviewed our 1099 form and box setup by looking at the vendor record, the account object component, building our vendor 1099 list, and running our RecPay 16 vendor detail report. In Part 2, we'll look at vendor 1099 list edits, the 1099 status and problems, changing vendor information, making adjustments to 1099 data, and viewing the 1099 snapshot. I'll be using Quick Starts throughout the tutorial. Pressing F1 in the Quick Start field shows us the options available. Using the Quick Starts bypasses navigating through the activity tree. V1 takes us directly to the vendor 1099 activity. The other way to open this activity is through Finance, Processes, Tax Reporting, Vendor 1099. This path also shows in the top of the workspace. In Part 1, we built our Vendor 1099 list for the first time to populate the 2017 calendar year table in the database. We also reviewed which vendors will be included on the list. These are vendors who have the 1099 reporting flag set to yes and have any amount in payments, as well as vendors who have the 1099 reporting flag set to no, but have payments made using an object component set up for 1099 reporting. The search form has fields for filtering on vendor name, vendor ID, vendors with or without changes, vendors based on the 1099 reporting flag, and on closed or open years. When a 1099 file has been generated for the calendar year, the year is closed and no edits can be made. You may want to review the year sometime in the future, so you would do that by selecting Yes, Include Closed Years. Today we want to build our list using no filters, so we'll use Ctrl-G or press Go to build our vendor 1099 list. On our list, we see the vendor 1099 column indicating if the 1099 reporting flag is set to yes or no in the vendor record. The vendor ID is listed, along with a column for the federal tax ID or mass social security number. We see the vendor name, and the remaining name and address columns provide the information from the vendor address record. If the vendor has more than one address, the address marked for 1099 will be used. Now we'll drag our vendor name 1 column over so that we can see the remainder of the columns. The paid amounts are calculated from payments made within the software. You can also import amounts, and we'll review that process in step 3 of this tutorial series. Adjusted amounts are made from this list. Adding the 3 together provides the total amount to be reported on the 1099. The status and problem descriptions work together. The status lets us know if a 1099 will print. The problem description provides additional information, and that matches the indicators we saw in Part 1 on the RecPay 16 report. The tax classification column helps review vendors and note where the 1099 reporting flag might be set incorrectly. For instance, most corporations don't receive a 1099. Staples is one of those vendors. To correct this, we open the Staples vendor record and use the quick link next to the vendor ID to go directly to the vendor form. Within the vendor form, we change the 1099 flag to no, save and close, so that we're back to our vendor 1099 form, and close this to return to our list. Back on our vendor 1099 list, I sort by problem description. I can see the top vendors will not have a 1099 printed because they have the 1099 reporting box turned off. My next problem description is that I have vendor with an incorrectly formatted tax ID or a missing tax ID. I open the record and we follow the same steps that we did before. Use the quick link to open the vendor record. On the vendor record, we see that the federal tax ID as well as the state tax ID or social security numbers are blank. Typing in these fields will not save tax ID information. You can see when you hit enter, it disappears. This is because the tasks for add and change Social Security number are user-based permissions given to only certain users. By selecting that, the dialog box opens and I enter a completely random and made up Social Security number for this vendor. Clicking OK, the mass Social Security number is populated. Can save a close again to be back on my list. As I continue to review my list, I notice that Evelyn Lilly's paid amount is more than expected. To find out more about this, I'll run a report to view payment amounts and accounts. I use QuickStart RRP for reports, Rec Payment, sort on the report name, and select Rec Pay 05 Payment Register. In the user options, I enter the first two letters and select F4 or the drop-down arrow to select the correct vendor. I then use Ctrl-G or press Go to run my report. On the report, I see that Ms. Lilly had payments for services, and those should be reported on her 1099. However, she also had payments for supplies that should not be reported. To correct this, we go back to our vendor 1099 list, open the record, and you guessed it, once more we're going to use the quick link to open the vendor record. From here, we change her 1099 form box from 7 to 0. Now, payments made to Ms. Lilly will be reported on her 1099 based on objects used in the payments rather than having all payments reported on box 7. Back on our vendor 1099 list, I notice that another vendor is not showing a payment because it was made outside of the software. I open the record and choose the task for Edit. This opens a dialog box where I click Yes, and now all of the adjustment fields within this form are unlocked. I enter the payment amount of $775 and then a payment reason, paid with a manual check. I can save close, and again we're back at our list. You may have noticed as we've gone through this process that the vendor 1099 list doesn't always update to show the changes that we've made. In order to ensure all of the correct data is in the tax table, we'll close the list and build it again. This causes the software to go through the 1099 logic again and recalculate based on the changes that we've made. Again, we select our 1099 name 1 and drag it over to the right so that we can see it with the remaining columns. We can see on our list that Travis Marconi has a $775 adjustment amount. We sort on status and see that there are no missing or incorrect tax IDs. And we scroll down to Evelyn Lilly, who's now showing that she's under the minimum amount for reporting to the IRS. Scrolling over a little bit further, we can sort again on the tax classification. Doing this, we see that Staples is now set as being turned off for 1099 reporting. The reason that Staples is still showing on our list is that payments have been made using object components that are set up to report 1099 amounts. This is a clue that we may need to review those payments and make sure that the correct accounts were used. To see a snapshot of a vendor 1099 form, we select a vendor name and choose the magnifying glass at the top of the screen. This opens a snapshot miscellaneous income report. It also has copy on it and the Social Security number is masked. Should this form be printed, these items indicate that this is not the original 1099 form. An added note for you, if you have a large number of vendors that need the 1099 form box and or tax classification fields updated, this can be done quickly using the vendor mass change process. Contact support at schoolability.com for assistance using that activity. The Vendor and Account Object 1099 form box setup used in this tutorial is for example only. Please refer to IRS guidelines to determine the correct box setup to use in your system. We welcome your feedback, comments, and suggestions at support@schoolability.com. This concludes Part 2 of our Vendor 1099 reporting series. We hope you'll join us for Part 3, Vendor 1099 List Additions, where we'll look at adding vendors to the list as well as importing 1099 information from outside the software.